Mesdames, Messieurs.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to this mixed general meeting of AXA that I'm here to preside over as the chairman of the supervisory board, in the presence of Mr. Henri de Castres, chairman of the executive board, and also Mr. Alfred Boucart, Christopher Condren, Denis Duverne, and François Piesson, all members of the executive board. We're going to proceed with the formalities, the prior formalities prior to the opening of the session, and we're going to set up the executive committee. Our meeting is being brought together here following the invitation to attend. The meeting has been formed based on the legal provisions. Notice of the meeting was printed on the 19th of February 2010 in the Bulletin des Annonces Légales Obligatoires, with an invitation to attend the meeting in the same document on the 19th of March 2010 and in the Gazette du Palais on the 20th of March 2010. I've just been informed that the meeting can take place normally, both in its ordinary form and also in its extraordinary form. Indeed, 10,861 shareholders are present here or are represented for a total of 1.35 billion shares. In other words, 54.35% of the shares taking part in the vote and 61.06% of the voting rights, of the existing voting rights. So I will inform you of the definitive quorum prior to the voting of the resolutions once all of the shareholders' shares present or represented here today will have been counted. So I would like to declare the present mixed general meeting open, and I'm going to continue in order to constitute the executive committee. So as scrutineers, if they are willing to accept this role, I would like to call upon the two shareholders present who themselves or as representatives have the highest number of votes. It is a question of the company AXA Assurance IARD Mutual, represented by Mr. Claude Bébéard, director of the company, and also the company BNP Paribas, represented by Mr. Jean-Pierre Monnier. I would like to thank them for their agreement and would like to propose to them that as secretary of the meeting, we appoint Mr. Denis Duverne. The statutory auditors who have been invited to attend in compliance with the law by registered letter are present. It is a question of Mr. Eric Dupont and Pierre Coll, who represent the firm PricewaterhouseCoopers Audit, and also Sirs Jean-Claude Pauly and Philippe Castagnac, who represent the firm Mazars. Finally, available for all those present at the general meeting, the legal documents are available if you so wish. I would like to add that the shareholders who asked for have received the documents and information provided for by the law on request, or we can send them to them from the head office. I'm delighted also to wish a very warm welcome to the members of the supervisory board who are present here at the meeting or who are scheduled to join us. Mrs. Wendy Cooper and Dominique Krenich, Mr. Norbert d'Entresangles, Jean-Martin Fols, Anthony Hamilton, François Martineau, Gérard Mestralet, Giuseppe Mussari, Ramon de Oliveira, Mr. Michel Pebro, and Ezra Suleiman. Mr. Leo Apotheker and Jean-René Fourteau have apologized for their absence. I would also like to note the presence of Mrs. Isabelle Cocher. Mrs. Fensue Lee, unfortunately, is not able to be present. She has been retained in Singapore. So we are together for the mixed general meeting in order for you to vote on the 33 resolutions of an ordinary nature and also 5 resolutions of an extraordinary nature. As you will see in the slides that will be presented to you, I will ask you to authorize me not to give you an in extenso reading of the agenda during the present sitting, and I would simply like to explain to you the agenda, the simplified agenda that is currently appearing on the screen. I would also like to ask for your permission not to read through the report by the Executive Board that is included in the annual report for 2009, report that has been made available to you at the head office, that has also been sent to you on request, and that is also available here at the entrance to the room. You will be able to observe that this meeting has one very specific feature, because first and foremost, we're going to examine the ordinary resolutions that related to the financial year 2009, and as such we are going to renew a member of the supervisory board whose term of office reached its end at this date. Then, if you are in agreement, we will vote upon the decisions that are related to the extraordinary general meeting, and these will focus on the change in the mode of governance of the company. And it is following on from this vote that we will resume with the ordinary general meeting, notably in order to vote upon the appointment of the members of the new board of directors. The fact that we are not reading these reports will enable us to dispose of slightly more time for the different presentations that are going to be given, and in particular in order to answer all of the questions that you wish to ask. So the summary gives you the order in which we are going to proceed during the course of this meeting. Finally, I would like to stress that as for the meetings in previous years, we will use electronic voting systems, and once again, we will explain to you how these work prior to the votes for the resolutions. And given the fact that AXA, above all, is about thousands of men and women who every day do a fabulous job, well, I would now like to invite you to discover this job that they do in the film that we're about to show you. Our lives are impossible to forecast. Today more than ever, it is AXA's duty to help people to face up to all the uncertainties that they encounter in their lives. We help when you most need it. AXA has organised, for example, the breakdown facilities of over 6 million people in 2009. We help you rebuild your houses. We helped over 160,000 victims from natural disasters in 2009. We take care of you at the most important moments. In Japan, for example, 1 million people are better protected to face up to the future. In France, 3 million people benefit from our health assistance systems, and we enable you to continue to enjoy life. 30 million people in the world have benefited from our welfare state assistance solutions. Also, we help you prepare for your future life and those of your families. Our life insurance contracts, for example, have enabled our clients to earn over 11 billion euros in 2009. Our commitment is also to make all of the company available to you. We wish to foresee and predict and avoid the risks of tomorrow. 1 million euros are allocated in AXA's various funds. We help the various communities to manage their risks. We had road safety programs, for example. We also have programs for health and also for prevention. We have educational programs, financial programs. As far as our staff are concerned, they are all there to help you face up to those inevitable risks that you encounter. AXA à tout cœur on the screen. Present in 57 countries. We help 96 million clients. We help them all to prepare for the future, feeling comfortable and serene about what awaits them. Let us reinvent our business.
Bonsoir, mesdames.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Now, ours is a fabulous business, as you've just seen. Now, what I'm going to do is talk to you in detail about our business, but I'm also going to talk to you about 2009 as a financial year, how the year went. Nevertheless, without going into too much detail as far as the figures are concerned, I'm going to do so because Denis Duverne, who is scheduled to speak after me, will go into much more detail on the figures and be much more precise on the information he gives you. So I'm going to talk to you about our business. I'm going to talk about 2009 and also about our outlook, our perspectives, and also our priorities. So What was 2009 like for the group after 2008? That was a year, as I'm sure you remember, that was particularly troublesome and disruptive, both for the economy, for the financial markets, but also for stakeholders such as ourselves, who were subjected to the crisis, despite the fact that we coped rather better than others. So this year, let me stress that we've had a very tormented year for the global economy. It's been a year of recession from a macroeconomic point of view, virtually across the board throughout the world. Growth has not been quite as strong in the emerging countries either. It's been a rather difficult year for the global economy. Nevertheless, it has been a much better year than 2008. And globally speaking, or overall, it has also been a year that has been good for AXA, that has consolidated, confirmed the fact that ours is a robust company. As you already know, and you'll see through the figures that we're going to show you in terms of our results, in terms of our profits, 2009, despite an initial difficult start to the year, has for AXA been a very robust, a good year. It has also been a year, and this is something I would like to thank you for immediately, it has also been a year that has been marked by the support that has been provided by our shareholders, strong or excellent support, because when, for example, at the end of the year, we decided to increase our equity capital, well, we had our different redeployment activities, our growth activities, for example. We were looking to increase our foothold in Asia. Well, you responded very positively, very favourably to the demands we made of you. So a good year, a year that was marked by the support that was provided by the shareholders, a year also during which we've drawn the lessons from the crisis. Even if, for example, as I said, we resisted far better than a lot of other people, and even if the insurance sector, globally speaking, resisted very well to the crisis, once again, far better than a lot of other financial sectors, simply because we don't have the same economic model as the financial sectors. And also within the AXA insurance sector, as I said, we resisted better. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean that with hindsight, we don't have lessons that we can draw from what we did. It doesn't mean that we didn't make mistakes that we suffered for afterwards, but that we have since been able to correct. You might remember that 2008 as a financial year was marked by results that were rather disappointing or bad in a certain number of places. You'll be able to see that 2009 marked, particularly in terms of life insurance, or you'll see it slightly later on, you'll see that 2009 in terms of life insurance has shown that we've gradually turned the situation around and come back to a more normal situation, even if for the moment we have not yet got back to the situation that we were at prior to the crisis. So the lessons that we need to draw, that we need to learn, are that we must never to cease to improve our risk management processes. We've strengthened our risk management teams quite considerably so over a certain number of years, and well, we believe that we can strengthen it even further. And in 2009 we carried out a certain number of operations whereby we effectively reinforced it. Now 2009 is also a year where the insurance sector, globally speaking, has demonstrated clearly that it serves as a stabilizer in the economy. Now, public opinion, for example, also the concerns of the regulators, concerns of the governments, for example, when they're focusing on our day-to-day environment, of course, that what they want to achieve is stability. Stability with a capital S, economic stability with a gradual return to growth, financial stability, for example, with a search to avoid volatility on the market. Also, the insurance sector, naturally speaking, I would stress, is a sector that contributes to stability. Our sector contributes to stability via what it does for its clients. And as you saw in the film that we've just shown to you, that was shown on the screen, you saw a certain number of facts, for example, that arise on a regular basis, but nevertheless these are facts that are quite striking. If you remember just one fact, for example, you can see that last year we had 160,000 victims of natural disasters in the world. This is a very precise figure. But let me specify that these clients have been victims, their goods have been damaged, their companies have been damaged, and we have helped them, and that's totally normal. They're our clients and it's our business to do so. I repeat, we helped our clients as quickly as possible to delete, even though it's never possible to completely forget the consequences and the damage that has been done to them due to these accidents. In the same way, in the financial sector, ours is a sector also that guarantees stability in a very simple manner. For example, in a period during which the financial markets were going through great turbulence, during a period of time whereby many people were obliged to sell their assets, our group, the AXA Group, continued, globally speaking, to be an investor. So the insurance model, globally speaking, and also AXA's model, more specifically speaking, is an economic model in which we are providers, guarantors of stability, and also facilitators, if you don't mind the term, facilitators when it comes to growth. So ours is a very important business sector. It's a useful business sector that serves a purpose for the people who are our clients. Also, ours is a useful business for society, globally speaking. Now, if you take a look also at the role that we play from an economic perspective above and beyond the work that we do when claims occur, despite the global recession, we've also continued to hire new staff. In 2009, for example, we hired over 25,000 staff worldwide. We also increased our staffing levels in France by 2,000 people. It's true, we hired 2,000 people in France, but our staffing levels didn't increase at the same level because we have a percentage of our staff who retired. So for a percentage of these 2,000, some of the people are to replace staff who retired. But overall, the group has hired 25,000 people around the world, which is a relatively high figure. We also contribute, and I stress, to supporting the long-term growth and also long-term progress and also long-term stability and progress to be made in our societies. Let me give you a very basic example, but one that I believe is very important. In other words, it's the effort that we have decided to make in terms of research work. As you know, we roughly 2 years ago created the fund, the AXA Fund for Research, which over a period of 5 years is going to make available to researchers a total of 100 million euros in different sectors concerning climatology or extending life expectancy. And this is a fund that wants to enhance our knowledge of risk. It's a fund that wants to provide prevention facilities, educational facilities, and we will provide 15 million additional euros in 71 research projects in a total of 10 countries. We are not doing this for selfish reasons and interest. There won't be any direct economic fallout, positive fallout for AXA. No, we are doing this because we consider that it is the company's responsibility in relation to society. This fund, for example, enables us to be present in different sectors where we have a significant amount of know-how and knowledge. So we believe that through the scientific committee of the fund that is presided over by Mr. Suleiman, who is one of the directors of the group, well, we believe that we are in a position, we have the skill to select those projects that really will set the standard and make the difference. These projects, 6 projects, account for 50% of the budget. So we don't just finance major projects, we also help researchers at an individual level. And last year, for example, we financed 57 grants in 8 different countries, once again on these specific subjects that have a direct link to our business, subjects that we believe are particularly important. And I'll use a term that is overused to a certain extent and used in the wrong context, but it's very true. We want to contribute to sustainable development in the world. Now, our efforts, of course, don't stop there. If we look at what we do for society, globally speaking, also on a day-to-day basis, we invest in order to get closer to our clients. One of the ways in which we do so, of course, is to guarantee quality of the service that we provide, but also we look to make available to our clients new innovative products. For example, in 2009, we continued in all of our companies throughout the world where we're present to revamp our products, to improve them. And there's one specific sector that we felt was a sector that would become increasingly important over the next few years. That is this area called dependency. Here we've made a lot of specific efforts, both in order to improve the quality of our product offering, but also in order to be able to guarantee that we have an active direction or pathway in this area, so that everywhere in the world we're able to provide adequate answers in this sector. And if you look at the French situation at the current time, for example, you know that it is one of the government's major concerns at the current time to find solutions to this problem. You know also that socially speaking, this is where we have a major risk that is coming about. Just to be very simple, currently, there are over 5 million women in France, for example, who spend more than 5 hours a day looking after a dependent person. And many people are very worried because they don't have the financial wherewithal to face up to this risk. So we believe that the insurance sector, and also our company in particular, can provide solutions in this sector, solutions that are very much constructive solutions. And so we really do want to ensure that our voice is heard in this sector. So I've talked about our business, and I've said that this crisis has demonstrated that in certain segments we've been unsettled to a certain extent. Nevertheless, this crisis has enabled us to renew and illustrate the fact that we serve a purpose in society and that we are extremely effective. We have ceaselessly throughout this crisis worked hand in hand alongside our clients, and all those people who've been victims of natural disasters or victims of personal events, for example, that had no direct link with the crisis. All of these people had the right to expect from us a level of service, a good level of service, and this is something that we have tried to provide for them. We believe, therefore, that we're coming out of this crisis with a clear understanding of the role that we play in society. We have illustrated that we have a strong role to play, and I'm going to get to the next point. We also believe that it's an opportunity for AXA that is one of the stakeholders that has resisted in this context, to stand apart from the crowd.
Beyond what the fiscal year 09 made it possible to produce in terms of earnings and showing our robustness, we feel that the outlook is favorable for AXA. Although in developed countries, economic environment to improve is not back to business or very buoyant. Why do we feel that the outlook is favorable for our business? Because you have like a lot of levers for growth. People think that macroeconomic growth will be low in developed countries, and they are certainly right. But we are, standing out because our positioning in many segments of the offering is one which meets the requirements of sectors which will be growing apace. Changes in demographics, although they lead to an aging of the population, which is not in favor of growth, such changes in demographics are favorable for us. The needs of an aging population grow when the population looks at what our business lines may provide to them in terms of retirement, in terms of estate management, in terms of assistance, or in terms of the care of the elderly. We have avenues for growth which are important, in as much as if the crisis showed something, it is the fact that states will have free resources. States and governments had in developed countries already levels of expenditures which were way too high, levels of deficits which were significant. What they spent out in terms of resources in the crisis, made it worse. Exit strategies will very likely, naturally, lead them to cutting down on their commitments in some sectors. Some places must substitute for them, or they should contemplate reforms in some places. All that affects social, societal, retirement schemes, all that affects the care of the elderly, and even insurance. We have here territories which remain sectors of growth even in slower growth. We'll have more leeway for maneuver. Third sector, I think we have like leeway and avenues for progress is savings, which was impacted by the crisis. There's a bad news short term to tell you, but a rosy outlook long term. The bad news short term is that whatever the vehicles they were invested in, except if they had like capital guarantees, which were supplied in some places, savers suffered, and the level of their savings melt down compared to what it was before the crisis, whereas the level of their needs remained the same or increased. Short term, well, the impact is negative. Assets volumes are less high than before. Therefore, development and profitability of our activities suffered therefrom. Midterm needs are larger than before. Therefore, it is here an avenue for growth, which is significant. Such avenues for growth are strengthened by a better understanding and a better grasping of the risk. It was quite seductive for some people before the crisis to look for investment solutions which were quite risky because they only looked at growth, and oftentimes they were not hit by any ups and downs. Crisis hit a lot of people. All those who had chosen risk investments suffered. Risk aversion increased. Consequently, all players able to offer products which would qualify or avoid risks are players who will have strong credibility. Our main competitors in terms of savings were generally banking products or where we're investing directly. We feel that a lot of our clients now will be looking for good results long term, but will be less reluctant when you got to pay a price to get a guarantee in countries, developed countries, in spite of slow growth. To us, for us on some sectors of insurance, we have, some pools for growth. There's a growth potential also, which is very strong in all emerging countries. For us, as for other competitors, emerging countries account for 52% of the population growth worldwide. To give you a striking figure, today there will be in China as many cars as in the US today. By 2020, it is not so far off. In 10 years' time, you can see, therefore, that all these countries are booming. Although it's hard to penetrate, such market regulations are not so favorable to us. Our interest is to penetrate them faster, which we started doing before the crisis. What we would like to now speed up. To do so, we have like some assets. Of course, we have our diversification and complementarities of our business lines, but other assets. We have a brand which is very strong. The AXA brand as such is today in insurance, and for the first time, the largest worldwide brand. Not everybody knows this in France, but when you look at the surveys on brand awareness, the organization doing it, which is called Interbrand, ranked AXA as the first worldwide brand in insurance. 52, ranked 53rd, and we're the third largest brand in France, which is something people don't know. I was quite surprised, coming before Danone, we're the third largest brand in France, which is an asset in an environment where customer confidence is important. Brand awareness is key to recruit customers. The second item is the clarity of our strategic lines. For many years, since the group expanded under the aegis of Claude Pébillard, the business model is quite clear. We don't want to diversify into every business lines. We want to do our business through a lot of distribution channels across the world, in particular in regions where growth will be strong, namely business model of insurance seems to be a business model which is quite sturdy. We don't want to have others. We're trying to do so everywhere. Whenever possible, we will stand diversification attempts, including bank insurance, which figured among the failures because the latest bank insurers suffered a lot from the crisis. The line will not change. Will not change our attack. We'll remain a group which would offer insurance products for P&C, offering protection products, offering insurance with like savings products, and offering, when necessary, very simple banking products as a supplement to the insurance offer. That's what is the spectrum of our activities within Nigeria. We will change our tack because we believe that it is the right model for our stockholders. As for customers, a model where growth will be ensured. The review at the balance sheet of the group is quite sturdy. Last year, people showed some worries. Figures for 9 speaks for themselves. What's happening today shows that this balance sheet remained sturdy. The debt equity ratios came back to levels before the crisis. Profitability of the group currently is at a high level. Risk management is efficacious. Of course, on and off, we're hit by shocks. Financial shocks, such as the financial storm of 08-09, which in some places led us to having lower earnings than the average. It was the case in the U.S. in 08, but in 09, we came back to profits. Sometimes these are shocks in P&C activities. Take the example of France. In 08, we had the storm. This year, we had Cynthia, events which are costly, which are part of our business. We're trying to preempt them, prevent them, to anticipate them. We might be at fault if we, but this will not jeopardize the group, and that's where diversification will have an impact. 2 items are for us essential and vital if we want to survive and expand long term. First, commitment by staff. We have 2,000 staff on board, which out in the field day in, day out, canvas and sell to customers and make for the reputation of the group. It's important for us to have the commitment of staff be at a high level and make progress. It increased, if you look significantly since the start of the decade, remained stable last year in spite of a strong crisis where distribution networks were put under pressure. We hope to make headway, and the satisfaction rate of our customers increased last year, although we feel that it's still insufficient. We consider that we have a lot of assets in a world which is being reshaped. What will be in its framework our priorities in 2010? First of the priorities is, of course, to continue to improve profitability. Although it improved in 2009, it is not yet back to the levels prior to the crisis. We have a lot of leeway. It didn't become, in spite of the pickup and the turnaround in life insurance, which could be improved upon, and because P&C is suffering at the present time. We're suffering because in many markets, prices and rates are, tumbling down, and events affected us in a large manner. Cynthia, for example, is a storm which hit England, Belgium, not only France, hitting Germany. A lot of natural disasters, and we must improve profits of our businesses in P&C, and we must make headway in asset management. Improvement of profitability remains obviously a top priorities of the group. To do so, to improve profits, would change the organization of the operations in the group. It's an ongoing process. We have no creed where we're certain that the business model is the right one, but we're pragmatic and as to the organization of the group. We set up 2 business lines in P&C and in life insurance, headed by François and Kip Condron, respectively, because we feel that it's a way to increase our efficacy and more responsiveness in operations, enabling us to better serve our customers and be more productive. We also, among our priorities for 2010, we also want to continue to combine organic growth and acquisitions. The good news is, when you look at the group, is that one of our ambitions when we launched Ambition 2012 in 2004 was to win market share organically. Looking at the state of affairs today, what was the change of our market share? We won market share in where we were present in markets apart from acquisitions we made. We want to continue this effort. We also want to continue the success of the group, namely making pinpoint and focused acquisitions, emphasizing emerging countries. To get there, we must start by finalizing current operations, such as the operation we started in Asia, which has ups and downs, which is somewhat frustrating in terms of deadlines, but not worrisome in terms of the final outcome. We must continue our expansion in emerging countries, starting by finalizing current operations or acquisitions. If we want to give content and meaning to what we call the preferred favorite company, we must reinforce customer trust and confidence, staff confidence, and the trust you put in us as stockholders. We were quite moved when you responded to the capital increase last year. We know that this trust does lead to duties, and we must deserve it, and we will try and strive to do so in a world which does not frighten us, where we have risks out there, but in which teams are ready and determined to seize upcoming opportunities. So much for what I wanted to tell you and share with you. And now, getting to Vern, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the earnings for fiscal 09. Thank you.
Bonjour, mesdames.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm now going to move on and present to you the results from our financial year 2009, as Henri de Castres just stated. So the first message that I would like to convey on the results for 2009 is the fact that our business activity has resisted well, that our results have been robust or sturdy, that our financial structure has been reinforced, has come out stronger, and also we would like to propose to you a dividend that is higher than last year. What I'd now like to do is go into detail on each of these elements individually. So first of all, let's focus on our business activity. Our revenue for 2009 was pretty much stable in comparison with 2008 at 90.1 billion euros, a drop in fact of 1%. And this 1% drop is due to the balancing out of our different business activities per business line, and also from a geographic perspective. In terms of the businesses, to start out with, if we can move back to the previous slide, please. In terms of life insurance also and pensions retirement, as we've been subjected to a drop in business activity that amounts to roughly 4%. It's the second consecutive year whereby we've seen a drop, and this is due to the financial crisis that has led our clients to be slightly more cautious. Our clients were on the one hand more cautious, but also our clients were more confident, more trusting, which means that, as we'll see slightly later on, the net contribution has been higher. Next, when it comes to P&C, we've continued to make progress in terms of our business. Our business has risen by roughly 1%, slightly less than the previous year, and again this is directly linked to the financial crisis. Next, in terms of asset management, our revenue has dropped by roughly 25%, and this is directly linked to the amount of assets under management, directly down to the financial crisis. Now, from a geographic perspective, the business activity has remained pretty balanced between the different geographic zones where the group is present around the world. For example, 2/3 of the business is located in Europe, with France that accounts for 22 billion euros. Then you have North and Central Europe for the same thing. Then the Mediterranean region, 13 billion, and the UK, 7 billion. And then you have roughly 20% of the business in North America, 11 billion, and Pacific Asia that accounts for roughly 10% of the group's business activities. Now, our clients, as I said a bit earlier on, have continued to place their trust in us with a net collection in the insurance sector that has remained high. Now, if we look at life insurance, our net collection amounted to 8.6 billion euros. So we have continued to ramp up to generate business activities in our life insurance business activity. Next, when it comes to P&C insurance, and when we look at our individual lines, we have had a net contribution this year that has once again been higher than 1 million contracts. However, when it comes to asset management, our net collection was negative in 2009. In other words, we had withdrawals for roughly 71 billion euros. This was mainly in the sector of the institutional clients, despite the fact that the investment performance improved, because in this sector specifically, in this area, our institutional clients tend to react in rather a delayed manner, and they wait for the performance to have improved over several quarters, over several years even, before they once again give their trust and place their trust in the asset managers. Let's now move on and have a look at the results. Our operating profit has improved in pension, savings and life insurance, and it has dropped in the P&C sector and in asset management. Globally speaking, our operating profit has dropped by 6%. In life insurance, the turnaround is due to the fact that, as Henri Ducastre indicated earlier, after showing a loss in 2008, we turned the situation around, and with the variable annuities in the United States, we made a profit once again. Next, if we move on to look at P&C insurance, we can see the beginning of the impact of the economic recession in Europe. Our combined ratio has dropped by 3.6 points to 99%, in line with what we were expecting, partly due to the recession, but also due to the number of natural disasters that took place in 2009. In other words, there were more of these than in previous years. Next, when it comes to asset management, the drop in our profitability is directly due to the drop in the number of assets under management. Even if this drop has been offset by reduced spending, nevertheless, reduced spending was not sufficient to completely offset the reduced amounts of money invested in the assets. Next, I'd like to move on to our trading account. If we look at our trading account, this has dropped by 8%. Here we have stability in terms of our net capital gains and capital losses. Nevertheless, unlike in 2008, we haven't benefited from the hedging operations from our share portfolio that we had at the time, and we've had provisions for sustainable development that were quite high in the second half of the year. And as you know now, no doubt, when these provisions are put in place, even when there's a turnaround situation with the assets, as was the case in the second half of the year, you cannot reintegrate these provisions into the profit and loss account. You can only do so when the assets are sold, and we'll increase our latent capital gains, as you'll see later. Next, we have multiplied by 4 our net profit. This is because our financial assets, the situation has been turned around, and this is due to the quality of the assets that we have. So we have 3.6 billion euros in 2009 compared with 923 in 2008. Let's move on now to the aspects related to our figures. Now, our solvency ratio, as you know, is extremely important. This is what guarantees the stability of the company. So if we focus on our solvency ratio, we have now we've reached the level prior to the crisis. For example, in 2008, the figure dropped to 127%. And in 2009, we've reached 171, which is above 2007 and almost as good as 2006. Why has this solvability ratio improved? Well, mainly because our operating profit has improved by 18 points. Also, the financial markets have turned around 21 points. Also, we have the capital increase linked to the financing of our acquisitions in Asia. This accounts for 11 points. And the minus point comes from the dividend proposal that is made to you here today that has a negative impact of 6 points on our accounts. Next, if we look at the group's equity capital, this has improved, and this is what is illustrated in the solvability ratio that I showed you. It is now 46.2 billion euros, unlike 37.4 billion euros at the end of 2008. So here you can see that the level is slightly higher than it was in 2007. The explanation behind this turnaround is the variation in the latent capital gains, 5 billion euros, as I said. So we made fewer capital gains, but we have also the latent capital gains that will enable us to make capital gains in the years that follow. The net result for the period is up 3.6 billion, and the capital increase that we implemented in order to finance our different acquisitions in Southeast Asia and a few other acquisitions. Now, also during the same period of time, we've been able to reduce our debt ratio. Our debt that had reached a high point at the end of 2008, 17.7 billion euros, it has now dropped back to 13.5 billion euros, in other words, below the level that it reached in 2007. So our debt ratio now amounts to 26%. This too is better than at the end of 2007, as you can see. The group's financial stability robustness remains reasonable in the AA category. Moody's and Fitch, for example, have maintained us at the levels respectively 2A3 and 2A-. With Standard & Poor's, we have been downgraded. We have dropped from AA with negative perspective to AA-. Standard & Poor's has rated us at the same level as the other two agencies. The main factors that explain the drop in the debt is, one, the capital increase, and two, the cash that has been generated by our hedging process for our share portfolio. Standard & Poor's reaction, I would say, is one that comes about rather late, that is more linked to the events that took place in 2008 than to the events that took place in 2009. Let's now move on and look at our assets portfolio. Now, you'll be able to see that this asset portfolio has behaved very well in 2009. Traditionally speaking, we distinguish between our general assets that cover both our traditional life insurance portfolios and also our P&L portfolio and our equity. And here you see an increase from 390 billion to 403 billion, so a very slight increase. I'd also like to stress that we've increased the amount of state bonds and also the figures for the corporate bonds. Our real estate portfolio has remained stable. Our share portfolio has also remained stable. They account respectively for 5% and 4% of our assets. We have also invested for the most part in state bonds, in the most sturdy state bonds, and also in company bonds that have the best marks. Our exposure to countries that we call the risky countries, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and also Ireland, our exposure here has remained very, very limited, and we have no particular worries in this sector in relation to these countries. Next, as far as dividends are concerned, today we are proposing a dividend of 55 centimes, up 38%. Last year, I'm sure you remember, we were right in the centre of the financial crisis, so we had to reduce our dividend considerably. This year, we are once again increasing our dividend. Nevertheless, we're maintaining a cautious policy because the dividend accounts for 40% of the trading account of the profits. Let's now move on to the share. The share price has increased. In the insurance sector, for example, we can see that things have gone better than the CAC 40 index, and AXA has behaved slightly better than the insurance sector, globally speaking. Over the period of a year, our performance is is up 48%. However, over a 10-year period, we're down 44%, and we're down 62%, for example, if we compare the highest figure that the share has reached, that was in November 2000. If we look at our peers in the sector, I would argue that our performance is among the best at company level, because if we look at the performance over a 10-year period, the company that has a comparable performance is Aviva and also Generali. And if we look at the historic all-time high, our level is pretty much the same as that of Generali. You can see that AIG has dropped considerably. However, they are 90% lower than these historic all-time highs, or if we look at their 10-year performance, the figures are very similar. Let's now move on to the shareholder structure. AXA's shareholder structure, as you has first and foremost the AXA mutual companies. Then you have BNP Paribas that has 5.3%. Then you have the individual shareholders that account for 7.4%. The salaried shareholders 5.9%. The shareholding is pretty diversified from an international perspective, with as many shareholders in the United States as in France. And we also have quite a wide-ranging level of representation in terms of the shareholders in the other countries. Before I conclude, I'd like to say just a few words about our acquisition projects in Asia. Now, you might remember that in the month of November, we launched a capital increase in order to finance the acquisition of our minority shareholdings in Asia. And we were looking to sell our Australian business activity as well. Now, we have entered into an agreement with NAB, which is an Australian bank, and the directors will take over the minority shareholdings. However, the Australian competition control authorities have shown that they're opposed to this approach, because they consider that the acquisition of NAB in Australia would be something that would be detrimental to competition in the Australian market. NAB has just over 4 weeks within which to attempt to sign an agreement with the Australian competition authorities. And moreover, the Australian company with which we had entered into contact, initially speaking, this is the company called AMP, has limited that they are monitoring the situation very closely, and that they too are still interested in performing the same operation with us if ever NAB is not authorised to make this acquisition. So we, as Henri Decazes said, are rather concerned, rather worried by the lateness of this operation. Nevertheless, we are confident as to the eventual outcome, whether it was NAB or with AMP. We are virtually certain that we will manage to buy back our minority shareholdings in Asia. Now, in order to conclude on what I've been saying, as Henry said, our financial results have demonstrated that we've been able to resist in the market. We've achieved sound, sturdy results. Also, our financial structure has been reinforced, and this means that we can considerably increase the dividend that we offer to you. AXA is able to set the standard despite the difficult context at the current time. We have a lot of very committed staff. Our service has continued to improve. We have a fully fledged, excellent top brand. We have an excellent position from a competitive point of view, and our products are highly innovative and will continue to innovate. And finally, we also have a high capacity to manoeuvre in a fast-changing international world where solvability changes, where everything changes, and we have many, many different opportunities, including those under Basel III. Thank you.
Ne perdez pas votre mal assurance. L'économie mondiale a renoué avec la croissance, mais l'année 2010 s'annonce difficile.
2010 is hard because economic growth will be quite slow. Now, please, pick up your cudgels, be legitimate and be credible. We're happy that the group is run by Jacques, Léo, Norbert, Jean-Martin, Jean-René, Anthony, François, Gerard, Giuseppe, Ramon, Michel, Ezra. But why did you introduce 4 women into the board? God, having only 11 men out of 15 members. What a shame. Defining strategy of a group like yours requires responsiveness and cold-bloodedness. Is a woman credible when you got to reassure investors or rating agencies? According to a recent survey, men in companies in the CAC 40 are being reduced, only accounting for 89% of the members of the boards. That is men. Women now aspire to business and management jobs. Are they full of pretense they have to run their household, making it possible for our managers to run business? Oh God, oh God, oh God, we have enough of it. We're tired of this.
Merci beaucoup.
Avant de vous faire part,
Or sharing the comments of the Supervisory Board, the report has been set up according to L125 article of the Trading Code, including the conditions to organize and prepare the work of the Council of the Supervisory Board, as well as on the procedures for audits and management of risks set up by the company. On page 418 of the annual report of 09, the reference document, comments by the Supervisory Board are on page 488 of the annual report. And let me now suggest to make more lively to present the main items thereof. Our Supervisory Board was very active in the course of 09 in terms of its committees as well as in terms of the board itself. As you will see, the number of sessions were large. In the course of the first quarter, we had to face up to the situation. As such, we had to address acquisitions and the capital increase necessary to finance acquisitions. We had to prepare the proposal we're making to you in terms of the governance changes. And last but not least, we wanted to handle harmonization issues when necessary, along with the recommendation authorities of the MEDEF in terms of compensation. The number of meetings was quite high and numerous. In the course of 09, we also reviewed the strategy and the portfolio of the company, and also we self-assessed in depth, which is done every 2 or 3 years, the activity of the Supervisory Board. The life of the Supervisory Board means first to recommend the approval of the accounts as they were prepared by the Executive Board. We're in favor in the change of the mode of governance proposed and suggested. And in this respect, we want to thank in particular Mr. Le Apotheker, Jean-René Fortu, and Gerard Mestralet, who for many years served on the Supervisory Board of AXA, and whose membership will not be renewed on the board. Thank you for your contribution to AXA. We're also supporting the proposal made to appoint to the Executive Board 2 new members, Madame Isabelle Kosher, Mrs. Swearfern Lee, as well as members that are part of the management of the company, namely Henri de Castres and Denis Duverne. What is proposed to you through this changes in the mode of governance is to move from a situation whereby the Executive Board was fully responsible for the business. The Executive Board would report to the General Assembly and setting up the resolutions, and the Supervisory Board would participate in company management through opinions given in the report given at the Assembly. We thought that the changes to a Board of Directors the only organ was not simply going from 2 to 1, but it means changing to a structure in which members of the board of directors are truly co-responsible for the company and strategy, reporting to you about the accounts and the resolutions they decide upon. As you will understand, this would require on their part both more availability and more commitment. It's a solution whereby we are taking advantage of the quality of these women and these men who participate in the future board of directors of AXA. If you so decide, the supervisory board and executive board will be replaced by a single structure. We'll have to appoint, which is proposed, 11 members coming from the supervisory board and 4 members coming from, for the first time, among whom 2 will have functions in management terms. To make sure that the balance has been struck out within the board in every case is ensured, we anticipated and provided for as the bylaws allow us when the term and the interim manager are the same people. 2 functions are combined and run by the same persons. In terms of statutes, it is mandatory that they be appointed a vice president, picked among the independent members whose roles were well defined by the bylaws and by the company laws to be proposed later for vote. This vice president or vice chairman will have the possibility of introducing topics, but also meeting the members of the board in the absence of the members of the management. He or she will report when appointed about his activities during general assemblies. Therefore, if you so agree and decide upon, provided the decisions must be made by the board of directors at the end of the general assembly, Henri de Cast would be the general manager of AXA. Norbert D'Entresson would be vice chairman, independent director referenced. Denis Duverne would be general manager, acting general manager. We also wanted that the 4 committees pursuing the work of the board be headed up by independent members of the board. In terms of the audit committee and the compensation committee, all the members would be independent members. The board of directors, Anthony Hamilton would head up the audit committee, Raymond D'Oliva would head up the financial committee, Norbert D'Entresson would head up the compensation committee, and Jean-Marc Neveau the ethics and governance committee. So much for the arrangements proposed to you in terms of changing governance and the mode of management of your company. Now let me move on to the presentation concerning the compensation policy of managers. Compensation and stock options and performance shares, retirement schemes and severance pay, and the obligations to have shares in reference document of 09 of AXA, page 121 to 160. As every year, some items contribute to the overall compensation of members of the company. Of course, you've got a fixed salaries which relates to the skills and the performance of every individual. Variable share, which takes into account the individual performance, but also results of the unit where you work and the global group performance. These 2 parts are given, cash on the barrelhead, and shares, stock options, and performance stock. In terms of performance shares, apart from the taking account of the performance of the unit and the group, we refer to the performance of the stock price, where stock options are related directly to the stock price. As you can see, a large part of the compensation package beyond the fixed salary, what you can call a at-risk compensation, what concerns the compensation beyond variable and fixed part are postponed or deferred compensation in time. The annual compensation of the executive board is made up of a fixed and varied part. The supervisory board will set up the criteria for the variable part paid results from the percentage of goals reached during the year in consideration. The table shows that the goal may be achieved 100%, below 100%, or above 100%. In terms of stock options and performance shares, AXA assigns every year since 1989 stock options and has been assigning since 2005 performance shares whenever possible. Attribution occurs 20 trading days after the publication of the annual results. After 19 March 2010, the strike price of options is never under the average of the 20 last prices, and there's no discount given. All the options given to the members of the executive boards are subject to performance conditions. They only become strikeable when the stock price performs at least at the level of the Euro Stoxx Insurance Index since the date of attribution or in the course of the last 3 years. Performance shares are subject to group collective criteria for 2 years based on 07, 08, and 09. Only 78% of the performance shares initially given in 07 were given. This figure was 80% for those given in 08. Last but not least, as we said last year, the Supervisory Board decided that the total number of options and performance shares given to the members of the board could not exceed 20% of the total number of options and performance shares given over the same period of time. The table shown here plots the changes in number of options given since 04, number of performance shares given every year since 05, the strike price of options, percentage of capital represented by the attribution, as well as the number of beneficiaries. You will note in passing that since 04, the share of performance shares increased compared to the distribution of shares, and the dilution was reduced by half, whereas the number of beneficiaries increased by about 50%. You'll also note in passing, as last year's, that in 09, in view of the specific situation of the reference price for shares, they were attributed at a higher price, which was 9.67 for all the staff and 15.47 for members of the board and executive committee. Now, let me now present to you information on stock options and performance unit given to the members of the supervisory board. Executive board, sorry. In 2010, there were 308,000 options for Rita Castra, 341 shares for Christopher Condron, 264,000 shares for Dean Duverne, and 211,750 shares for Francois Pierson. You have all the strike prices here, percentage relative to the total, we're below the 20% are referred to, as well as the number of performance shares and the total held. Obligations to hold shares correspond for the executive board, determined 3 times the annual compensation and 2 times or twice for the members of the executive board. they must make sure that the levels be reached. Now, let me shed some light on the, severance pay schemes for Henri de Castres, Denis de Verne, François Pierson. They've been benefiting as employees from the clause of the bargaining agreement for insurance companies for Henri de Castres and Denis de Verne. They committed to giving up their labor contract after the General Assembly, in line with the recommendations by FETMED of the Supervisory Board in early 2020, reviewed and revisited the consequences of this. They're giving up their labor contract in terms of their protection systems, and decided to maintain the social protection schemes, healthcare retirement schemes, and equivalent conditions to those applicable to all the other executives of AXA in France, setting up an indemnity in case of their stepping down as corporate directors. Indemnity is initially of 19 months for Denis de Castres and 12 months for Denis de Verne because of their seniority, and capped at 24 months subject to performance conditions. Last but not least, the right to have a 6 months notice and a severance pay was deleted. For Christophe Conrad and Alfred Burkhardt, they would benefit since they joined the group from a clause with equitable in AXA Belgium, calling for, in case of for malpractice, and indemnity equivalent to 2 years of compensation apart from their jobs within the executive board of AXA. In terms of supplementary retirement, François Mr. Duverne and François Pierson, Mr. Castres would have the same regime as the other foreign executives. These rights are dependent on their completing their career and there being 10 years in the company. Christophe Conrad will benefit from the equitable of a clause making it possible to get at 65 years of age additional supplementary retirement according to 2% of his compensation, for full years of seniority. In terms of Alfred Burkhardt, he will have, from AXA Belgium, a clause in his contract whereby at 65 years he will get additional supplemental retirement equivalent resulting from the formula shown here, whose precision you can, of course, duly appreciate. In terms of the compensation of corporate officers, we used a study done in 2009 by Tara Watsons about the compensation practices for similar jobs in a sample of CAC 40 companies and in European emissions companies, and according to the G20 recommendation of the European Commission and the Financial Stability Forum. As of 1st May 2010, we rebalanced the fixed varied pay. This rebalancing of the pay for Henri de Castres and Denis de Verne would result from decisions to be made by the Executive Board and the Assembly, and as recommended as we do habitually, this will be, of course, posted on AXA website once the decision has been taken. Let me now give the floor to the statutory auditors.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, the shareholders. Now, this year, within the scope of our role as the statutory auditors, we have 8 reports to present to you, my colleagues and myself, and we would like to thank you ahead of schedule. Thank you for allowing us to give you a very brief presentation of these. Now, these said reports are grouped together into 4 categories. The first category concerns the reports on the accounts, the annual accounts and also the consolidated accounts. The second part specifically concerns the device for internal control and the report report from the management of the Supervisory Board. Next, we have the regulated agreements, and then we have 4 reports that specifically concern the authorizations that are put to you in relation to the extraordinary part of this meeting here today, vis-à-vis operations on the capital. What I'd now like to do without further ado is to present to you the reports from the first 2 categories, and I will let Eric Dupont then move on to present to you the 2 last categories. Now, our reports on the accounts, therefore, I would like to remind you of the objective or the target behind our assignment, which is to obtain the guarantees, reasonable guarantees, as to the regularity, the sincerity and the faithful image of the accounts, and to ensure that these accounts do not contain any significant anomaly. So in order to do so, we use the audit work that is performed by our 2 firms in the different countries, and we apply a specific approach depending on the different business area of the group that we're looking at. The reports on the individual accounts of AXA SA are on page 460 of the reference document. We have concluded on the certification without any reservations, and under the specific checks, for example, we have checked the financial information that was communicated to the shareholders, and more specifically the information in the management report, and we have no observations to make on this subject. Our second report is our report on the group's consolidated accounts, and you have this on page 404 of the reference documents. These accounts have been established since 2005 according to the international reference framework called IFRS, and we have would like to conclude on we approve of these accounts without any reservations. In compliance with the law, we have to justify our evaluations and assessment, and in particular the different elements that are included in the accounts and that require our judgment, evaluation or estimates. Now, above and beyond the continuity of the continued financial crisis, we in particular have considered the evaluation of the financial assets, also the technical provisions, the assessment also of the losses carried forward, and also the different operations on the derivatives and the processing of coverage operations. Also goodwill. We've taken into account all of the provisions in these areas, and we've concluded on the fact that we would like to certify without any reservations whatsoever everything that we have analysed, hence the accounts. We also looked at the group's management report, and we have no comments, no observations to make on this. So that's what I wanted to say concerning the reports on the accounts. I would now like to move on to the second category of the reports. First and foremost, the President's report under the procedures of internal control and management control. Now, we became aware of the objectives of the overall organisation and the procedures that make up the internal controls, and we have been able to evaluate that, yes, all of the President's report is a sincere observation and analysis. So thanks to the work that we performed, we have no observations to make, and we would like to confirm that this report does cover and meet all of the requirements that the commercial or the trading code stipulates. So let me now pass the floor over to my colleague, who is going to present you the 2 additional categories of reports. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the third category that we work on in due diligence concerns the elements that are reported on in our special report provided for under Article L2478 on page 73 to 77 of the reference document. We would like to remind you that this report and the work that it refers to is not intended to give an opinion on the utility or the reasons behind what is done. Simply, we would like to make all of the people present here aware of a certain number of factual aspects. In other words, the agreements and commitments or engagements in question have been authorised by your supervisory board at a previous date, and we were duly informed of this by the management of your group. The first part of this report concerns the commitments made and taken by the 3 members of the executive board of the company, engagement or commitments that Mr. Chateauvieux referred to earlier on in his speech. Secondly, on the 7th of October 2009, the Supervisory Board confirmed the additional retirement policy that the top executives would benefit from, Mr. Ducastre, Duverne and Pierson, under the same conditions as those that are applied to the other executive staff in the AXA Group in France. Under certain conditions with this regime related to seniority, additional annuity retirement will be paid out in addition to the standard retirement, but We would like to stress that the regime is explained in a more detailed manner in the report, and I would like to invite you to refer to this if you require further information. Moreover, your supervisory board, in its session on the 17th of February 2010, made it possible for your company to subscribe for Mr. Duverne and Mr. de Castres, related to them giving up their respective labour contracts, new elements that you will be asked to give your opinion on later on. These commitments or engagement are in relation to the maintaining of the social welfare protection system for Mr. Ducastre and Duverne, similar to that is proposed to all of the executive staff in France. Moreover, they will be allocated a certain amount that will be equal to what is provided for under the collective agreement when it comes to executive staff. However, there are performance conditions that are linked to this, and only under certain circumstances when the people leave the company. The calculations are explained in detail in our report. Finally, as far as the previous agreements are concerned, and this is the other part of the special report, here our report focuses on 2 agreements that are still effective during the course of the year. In other words, the agreement protocol from 15th of May 2006, an agreement with Schneider in relation to shares between Schneider and the group, and also an agreement with BNP Paribas that dates back to 2005, and here it's a question of holdings that belong to both your group and to BNP Paribas. So very briefly, that's what I wanted to refer to concerning the regulated agreements. The last category of diligence concerns the different categories in relation to the social capital of the company. And here the elements will be presented for your approval within the scope of resolutions 12 to 14 later on. And the corresponding reports are on page 409 to 413 of the reference documents. The first 2 reports that enter into this category focus on the resolutions from 12 to 13, and here we have a common ceiling that is referred to. It concerns the access to the capital that is given to members of staff in the group. These two operations are designed to enable your management board to increase the capital and get rid of the preferential subscription rights for certain specific beneficiaries. The beneficiaries can be those people who are parts of the company shareholder scheme, and also under the same conditions, certain members of staff and also certain heads of the company will be able to benefit from it, as will financial companies who are working for your company. The aim behind this provision is to be in a position to propose salaried shareholding possibilities that are close to those who benefit from the 12th resolution. We would like to be able to propose it to those staff who can't benefit from this system when they live in other countries. We checked the contents of the Executive Board's report on these issues, particularly concerning the way in which the price would be determined. We have no observations to make at this stage, given the fact that the price has not yet been fixed. Hence, of course, we cannot give an opinion on the definitive conditions of this operation, and so, as a result, on deleting the preferential rights. When your executive board will use its authority, we will compile a future report in the future that will be put to you. Next, our report concerning the project to reduce the capital, and this forms the object of the 14th resolution that we will ask you to vote upon here today. This report is on page 493 of the reference document. In compliance with the assignment given to us by the trading court, we have no comment to make concerning the clauses and conditions of this operation. We would like to remind you that it is subordinated to the vote that you have under the 11th resolution concerning the buyback of shares. Our last report, that is also in the reference document, presents the different methods under which the general meeting last year gave the right to your board to proceed to increase the capital. In the session on the 29th of October, this was talked about, and the capital increase was increased for roughly 5.5 million new shares. We've analysed all of these operations in compliance with the professional doctrine that applies. Notably, we have checked their compliance, for example, with the authorisations that were given by your meeting here, and also in the Executive Board's report, and we have no comments to make. So, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, this is everything we wanted to say concerning the statutory auditor's reports. Thank you for listening.
Merci, messieurs. Je remercie.
Thank you, gentlemen. I would like to thank the statutory auditors. And before I pass the floor over to the different people in the room, I would like to ask the Executive Board to please read to you the answers to the questions, the written questions that were sent to it in front of the meeting. So I'm going to refer first of all to the first question. Instead of allowing Henry to do so, I'll give you the question and then the answer afterwards. Now, the question was asked by the ex-Cilio holding company, and I quote, "In the general meeting of the 30th of April 2009, you gave us a very reassuring answer as to our written question about the principle whereby you talked about compensation and advantages for the management staff, and you stated that you would provide legible information on these. We have observed that, contrary to your reassuring words at the time, the fixed salary of Mr. Henri de Castres rose rapidly in 2008, whereas the profits of the company had dropped drastically, and the dividend was reduced by 2/3. We've also noted that the calculation of the variable remuneration for the chairman was very favourable to him, plus he acquired a certain number of stock options and a certain number of free shares were distributed, whereas this advantage was deleted for staff. Today, we would ask for legible information once again in reference to 2009 concerning the remuneration, also the advantages in relation to Mr. Henri de Castres and the different directors. We would like you to specify, given the names of the different people concerned, the amounts and the percentages that have been received over the last 2 years for 08 and 09, also the compensation and the advantages granted to the chairman Henri de Castres and the directors. I would like to remind you that Henri de Castres' fixed salary had not been increased since he started his functions in in the year 2000. We would also like to specify that all of the fixed and variable compensation for these 2 years that have been mentioned were made public and have been illustrated in all of the different presentations that have been given to you. Concerning the members of staff, apart from the number of shares, stock options, which, as I said earlier, have increased by 50% as to the number of people who now benefit from them, it is true that 50 free shares were allocated to each member of staff in AXA in the world on the 1st of July 2007, and it's true that this allocation was the first tranche of an AXA Miles programme, one of the components of the HR approach that we set up as part of Ambition 2010. In 2007, we also announced that a second tranche of 50 shares would be allocated to each member of staff, but that it would be subject to them achieving their performance indicators. It would be measured in relation to the operational results and in relation to the satisfaction index. Given the fact that these targets, these objectives were not reached, the second tranche of the AXA Miles was not allocated. Next, as far as the last point inherent in the question is concerned, in other words, the way in which we report on the fixed and variable salaries and the ways in which they increase, for this it's important to look at the table that I presented to you earlier on and that we also present in the document that we refer to as being the reference document. The second question is a written question that we have from Mr. Jean-Paul Alliot. When the results were presented for the financial year in 2009, your slogan was, and I quote, "At AXA, despite the financial crisis, we have achieved good results and we've continued to improve customer satisfaction." I would like to remind you that in the presentations of the previous years, Chairman Henri de Castres decided to get rid of the advantage of 53 years for staff and the two criteria, that of the operating income and the customer satisfaction index not having been reached. Today, a client, for example, when he asks for information, gets in touch with the customer relations department, I would argue, and it's a question, is it reasonable that he waits for 2 years before he gets an answer? Why, despite the fact that the mediator said that the person who asked the question was right, it's been very difficult to enter into dialogue. I would simply like to say that AXA does not necessarily have a close and qualified relationship with its clients. I would like to end by asking you, what is AXA's position concerning its relations with its clients? I'm thinking here of all of AXA's small clients who are without defence. Now, let me just stress that concerning our policy in relation to our clients, we really are convinced that customer satisfaction is very much at the heart of the centre of everything that we want to do within the scope of our strategy. We really do measure the progress that we make in a very rigorous manner as part of this approach. Now, you say in the question that the criteria that we set ourselves were not reached in 2008. This doesn't mean that customer satisfaction didn't progress, because on the contrary, it did progress, but not quite as much as was intended. It increased from 80 to 81%, and this we considered as being insufficient because we'd set a target of 82%. And this is the reason why this criteria was not met. This year, the increase has gone from 81 to 82%. You also talk about difficulties that you encountered, sir, with the Customer Relations Department for AXA France when you requested information. Let me stress that as far as we know, this information was provided to you. If this is not the case, if it was not the case, or if you were under the impression that the answer was not complete, we would like to invite you to get in touch with the Customer Relations Department of AXA France once again. The third question is a question that comes from the association EPAC that works on initiative for citizen shareholding. Now, it has two components, one concerning greenhouse effect gas and one concerning giving jobs to seniors. Question, in 2009, what was the amount of gas of greenhouse gas emissions that were issued by our company? Please specify what type of gas is included and the extent of the perimeter that you take into account. And can you look at all of your production processes, the tertiary production, logistics, purchasing of supplies, etc.? Second question, can you talk about the evolution in relation to 2008 on a like-for-like basis? Answer, for a question such as ours, CO2 is the main greenhouse effect gas that is issued, and the emissions come mainly from professional travel by plane or by train, for example, or due to the fleet of vehicles that we have. And the consumption also comes from the energy that is consumed by our different buildings. In 2009, the group's consumption amounted to 694 tons of CO2 equivalent. In other words, 2.94 tons per person or equivalent. That's for the direct staff, which accounts for a reduction of 14.5% of the greenhouse gas emissions on a like-for-like basis in relation to 2008. Now, this drop is due to the fact that numerous entities in the group have limited the amount of travel, partly because of the financial crisis, but also because a certain number of measures have been introduced in order to reduce energy consumption. We've also made efforts in order to reduce our energy consumption in our buildings, and we've also looked to reduce the amount of energy consumed by our IT equipment. The environmental data collected covers 82% of our staff and then forms the subject of an extrapolation in order to estimate what the data corresponds to for the group, globally speaking. That's what I wanted to say in relation to greenhouse effect gases. Next, on employing seniors, the question is, what is the percentage of people of over 50 and of over 55 years of age who are working in our company in France? Next, how many people aged over 50 and 55 have been hired during the course of 2009 in France, in Europe and around the world? Answer, within the headcount of the AXA Group, 19% of the staff, sales and non-sales staff, are aged between 51 are more than 51 years of age, and 9% are over 56. In Europe, 24% of the staff are over 51 years of age, and 11% are over 56 years of age. It's in Asia, notably, that the average age is a lot lower. Next. And let me just remind you that the group's average amounted to 19% for staff of over 51, but in France we have 29% of the staff who are over 51 and 15% who are over 56. The average age of AXA staff is 40 at group level, 42 in Europe and 43 in France. In 2009, the AXA Group, and I said earlier on, we talked about 25,000 people. I said roughly 25,000, whereas in fact, if we add together the long-term contracts and the short-term contracts that have been converted into long-term contracts, we've hired a total of 26,794 people. However, the RH tools and systems that we have in place at the current time do not enable us to differentiate between the number of people who are over 50 and 55 that were included among these new hires. Besides, it is illegal in certain countries to establish figures on this. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are the answers that I wanted to give you concerning the written answers that we'd received.
Let's open the floor for discussion. Stockholders would like to ask questions, please do so. And do so if you want to ask questions. And ask for a roving mic from the hostesses. Sir, panel 4, and then we'll move on to, yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Let me return to the capital increase operation, I'd like to tell you that Mr. Boucard sold his rights and did not subscribe in any right. Mr. Del Costa did not provide any capital to the capital increase. I don't know what where the documents come from, which were read by Mr. de Castro. Who wrote the answers? Crédit Mutuel, as shown on the screen. You got a question which is more of interest to me, namely about AXA private equities. What is this business? What is AXA private equities doing? Is it own trading activities or proprietary activities or for clients and customers? You're negotiating billions of euros of shares. Is it third party or proprietary trading? Okay, let me respond. Mr. Shajiv told you that the manager of the group had obligations to hold and keep their shares for some time. All these duties have been fulfilled and met. I have to hold my shares for 3 years. I have AXA stock for more than 7 years of compensation. When you want to set up a stock, you should do this. Buy stock. We have to raise and strike stock options. And you need to have money on which you pay tax. We're beyond the duties. In some cases, we did not follow the, capital increase because we did not have resources necessary to do so, and we already had many stock and went beyond the obligation to hold stock based on standards applicable in France and abroad. In terms of AXA Private Equities is the group company investing in unlisted companies, managing about 20 billion euros in assets. This company gets capital from AXA insurance companies, 30–40%, and capital from outside investors to the tune of the rest. AXA Private Equities is investing both in acquisitions, operations for unlisted companies individually, and is also a large investor in funds of private equities. What you read in the last week in the papers refers to 2 operations which are ongoing, one on private equity, a business of Natixis, and the other private equity activities of Bank of America. Private equities has a policy of investing cautiously. That's why it's one of the most active players when our opportunities arise at the end of the crisis. Sir, and then it will be up to you, sir. Mr. Boulidan, Mr. Chairman, I got 3 topics I want to broach. The first, I want to be reassured as to the process of how you achieve the result of the DUAP merger in '97. There was the bubble burst, the earnings, and after the bubble burst, for 10 years, you progressively worked to produce operating income, which was good for AXA because it was a recurrent, income to be distributed. In '09, surprise, surprise, you had to adjust values using derivatives explained by the credit spread narrowing and resulting in a decline in the earnings unexpectedly. In '09, the pendulum swung back, you adjusted the values, increasing the earnings fourfold. I'd like to know about the impact of the adjustments on the earnings in the coming years. Of course, I know that we're always talking about the IFRS standards, but I mean, it's not the only culprit. My second topic are asset management activities. Asset management activities do not produce golden eggs. You're making efforts to look for synergies in your different sectors of business. I'd like to ask you, any synergy to be had from bringing together AllianceBernstein in the U.S. and AXA Asset Management in Europe? Third topic I want to broach, I was surprised and taken aback. You talked about emerging countries. What about the decline in the level of new business in Asia? Kind of not only, for Japan, could you give us some more? How do you see the developments out there? Thank you, Mr. Boulidon. As to the changes in the income and the operating income, what you have said is correct, sir. Let me add, and let me try to reassure you, Mr. Boulidon, when you look at what happened in terms of the operating income in the crisis, at a time when there was a very violent shock across life insurance activities, the operating income remained at about 4 billion euros. Therefore, we have a basis operating income which is about 3.5 and 4 billion euros, which is quite stable throughout the crisis. Although when the environment is stunned by shocks, it's a good news because, as you said, in the previous cycles, capital gains, made for the earnings, the total earnings declined strongly in 2008, due in part to losses on assets, credit losses on assets we had, like Lehman stock, that had to be impaired. The net income decreased because of the IFRS standards. There was the pendulum swung back in 2009 because credit spreads, as you said, narrowed. We could take back a part of what had been earmarked in terms of provisions. Now, if markets are to stabilize, there should be no longer this gap between the operating income and the net income. To be sure, market volatility would create this gap. This gap is the other element. To reassure you, sir, is to say as follows. In some cases, we earmark provisions through the P&L. When the value of this stock goes back up, well, it turns into hidden capital gains, does not go through the P&L. Before they're realized, looking in detail as you've done, I guess, since you do it every year, the documents published by the group, you'll see that in 2009, with the stock of hidden capital gains went back up, meaning that we have a capacity to generate capital gains in the coming years. Now, as to Asia, you got two contrasted movements. Japan first, and the rest of Asia on the other hand. In Japan, per se, which is a country which is highly profitable for part of the business with high margins, but where we have still old business, when we took over the company of negative margins, no tail-offs, the margins are negative in Japan indeed. Growth is slower, even negative in some cases, because you've got things we're not doing any longer. Margins remain quite high in spite of it all. In the rest of Asia, growth is very strong. It was strong last year, and is still stronger in the first quarter of 2010. one of the reasons why we wanted to carry out the operation we're doing now in Australia, they're consisting in selling our Australian assets or activities to get 100% of activities in Asia, instead of having 50% of our activities in Asia and 50% of Australian activities. You have no reason to be worried, sir, as to the growth of new business in Asia, as you will see, except for a mishap, as always possible. Growth should be very strong in 2010, in particular because some agreements we signed with high-grade distributors in Indonesia and the Philippines and Thailand, in particular, are now being ramped up. So much for the answer to your question. Do you want to add something? Second question, sir. Asset management. Oh, I forgot asset management. Oh, yeah. In terms of asset management, you said that this activity is not, the end that lays, the golden eggs. You should not just stick to your 09 was tougher for asset management because assets dropped by 25% because a large part, 50% of the assets is made up of stock and shares. We can only cut expenses by 14%. These activities are midterm growing stronger than insurance activities. Activities consume less equity and seem to be quite profitable. Now, as to the question of synergisms, we have asset management activities carried out under several brands, which is, I would say, an asset to have the capacity to carry out activities under several brands. We're talking actually about diversification. It's a source of diversification when expertise, goes through a bump in the road. We have other products to offer to our customers. We're not tapping into synergies to the max. We have diversification of activities on expertise, which seems a large asset to us in asset management terms. Now, next row. Okay, next row. Michel Fargeau, a few years ago, I suggested something which was never applied. Everyone needs to be reassured in terms of your car, your home, your dwelling, your house. AXA, I said, becoming larger could make a gesture for stockholders and possibly give us a discount on insurance this year. Let me hug the mic here. My broker said, "Okay, Michel, drop AXA." Why should I drop AXA? My broker said, "There's a competitor out there coming in. Do you want me to cite its name?" Yeah. A German competitor. I don't like the Germans, but anyway, because of my Jewish origins. But anyway, indeed, the insurance contract, home insurance contract. I made on the home insurance contract 50 euros. 50 euros out of 250 euros I had to pay. I'd like to know why AXA is so expensive for the same services rendered. Same services, namely, is what I wanted to ask of you. Can my recommendation be implemented? But I'm still a customer of yours. Thank you for your loyalty, sir. Second point. We might look at, again, if it appears on the screen. François, I'd like to say something. Third point. Comparisons are always so easy to make, so direct. You may look in detail. Sometimes you feel that guarantees offered are the same, but when the loss occurs, coverage is not really the same. We're told that we're more expensive than others frequently. The reason is that we have networks which give quality advice. In many cases, quality of advice means that we must ask the customer to take out more coverage because it's not always what is protecting him best. Let me add one or 2 points. For many years now, sir, I've been capturing market share and recruiting more customers than customers are leaving us like you, sir. It means that we have the right price for the homeowners insurance in line with the market. First point. Second point, sir. Let me spell it out. We're removed from this point, namely the French market posted results in 2009 which were quite poor because of the storms and because of an increase in the loss ratio for individual insurance, home insurance, or car insurance for individuals. Now, I'm really sorry that you left the company, whereas in early 2010 we are continuing to gain market share in homeowners insurance, possibly in terms of yeah, I mean, we may look at your case if you want to, after the meeting is over. We're going to try to get you back, sir. Now, madam, sir. Okay, okay. Good afternoon, sir. I'm a family stockholder. Let me ask you 2 questions as follows. One, on the regulatory environment. Another one on the issue of state indebtedness in the bond market. And the first question, I'd like to know what about the Solvency II issues. Who decided what should be the rule, and what about equity requirements for insurance companies for shares or financing economy, or possibly in the same topic? What about the evaluation methods? Well, the mark-to-market scheme, which you criticized because of its pro-cyclicity in times of crisis, and which would increase the morosity. What about this issue? It's a major issue, the mark-to-market scheme. And fiscal year 2008, if I understood, fell victim for a large part between the operating income and the net income. The current income fell victim to these valuation methods, which are mark-to-market. Second question I want to ask you is about the bond market and the state indebtedness today. I don't want to talk about the turmoil in some countries in Southern Europe. You think, sir, that the current tensions arising in the bond markets may increase substantially, leading to a lot of tensions, leading to a lot of bond market issues. What is the risk? AXA, I guess, as a bond exposure, which is limited as explained during the meeting, but obviously I feel it might be wrong that investors understand, perceive that an insurance company like a bank is exposed directly to the bond risks and sovereignty risks, having an impact on the stock price of the group, whose qualities you pointed out, sir. I'd like to get your feeling on such points. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's try to answer on Solvency II. For those who are not specialists, it's indeed the process whereby in Europe we discuss the issue to determine what should be the level of equity held by insurance companies to be entitled to do their business and apply that rate. It's a deep-seated reform Solvency II follows up on Solvency I, which is the method to measure the capital equity ratios. Solvency II is an approach which is more economic to risks. On the principle, AXA is in favor of Solvency II. Why are we in favor of Solvency II? It's because we feel that it's a system which is more smarter, more modern, more appropriate to measure the real risks out there. We feel also that it's a system obligating some players which did not really misprice their risk to price them better. We feel that it's a system which is not necessarily unfavorable to companies having the resources to have sophisticated risk management techniques, being in favor of the as the devils in the details. Now, what about the calibration thereof? Like drugs, if you take too many drugs, you might die of it. Now, the issue is to know whether regulators will or won't follow the opinions of the supervisors on the right calibration. Decision makers for analysis are European states. The process as follows. As well as the authorities in CAOPS, people supervising insurance activities, under the Bank of France, make recommendations to the European Commission as to the right calibration, and the Commission will submit them to the European Council of Europe. The directive was voted upon by Parliament. There will be a decision of, implementation. Several fine settings were done. This is the first QS4, which is process to define. We have QS5 since April 15th. Fears arose during the summer because all the authorities infected by the banking crisis started to take margins. If they had been followed, this would have resulted in asking insurance sectors in Europe as a whole to have 400 billion euros of capital in addition, which is absurd for capital having had no needs of a crisis, requiring 400 billion additional capital. QS5 is a sort of rough estimate. We don't feel that this the ultimate calibration. The European Commission understood things, but and as much as you can see, there's a quest for compromise, which is the poor compromise, which is not based on the right analysis. To give you a point of detail, in particular, calibration, namely needs and capital requirements for PNC, are too excessive. The risk is that there might be less capacity to cover customers, and insurance will be more expensive. You need more capital to do business. Stockholders want profits and more return. If you need more capital to take out a car insurance, the price of the policy will increase the price of the contract. This is bad for the customers and bad for the company. We feel that negotiations will continue. We hope that we will get to something which is reasonable within a system which is globally better because it measures the risks in a more precise manner. We feel that political authorities are aware of what is at stake here. In terms of the accounting techniques, very little change, in particular right now, governance of IASB, which is the authority making recommendations in terms of accounting standards, really didn't change. We remain reserved and negative about this. Now, as to the stat indebtedness, well, it's a risk out there. Markets are shaken. Consequences are very likely excessive. If you look at what was the changes in the stock price of AXA over the last few days, the stock price lost €2, about 15% of its value. If you have a 4 billion decline, our net exposure to Greece is a few hundreds million euros and not than zero. So basically, the recognition is too excessive, going beyond Greece, leading possibly again to turmoil in the market. We hope the feeling we have is that it's unavoidable at long term. Long interest rates will increase. They're at historically very low levels. Second point, spreads, namely the additional price to be paid by states that are not virtuous, namely keeping to high deficits or those increasing their tax instead of reducing expenditures. Spreads will increase for those states. Now, we should note that the increase in interest rates is not necessarily something which is poor for insurance activities when you increase them progressively. Therefore, I say our industry is not threatened by an interest rate hike. This hike will increase progressively. It's not yet in Europe, but already occurred in the US.
Thank you, Henry. I'll accept the question next to the person who has panel number 7. My name is Viviane Natter. I'm an individual shareholder. Chairman, I have a question for you. At the current time, individual shareholders are extremely sensitive to measures in order to enhance our loyalty. Are you considering paying a dividend, a higher dividend, for example, depending on the time period during which people have held shares? Even if I know that there is a law or a bylaw that imposes certain criteria upon you, nevertheless, we would be particularly pleased if you could reassure you from this perspective, particularly with regard to the fractions, particularly with regard to the different operations that take place per nanosecond. In other words, we would like there to be a clear distinction made between those people who speculate and those people who invest well and truly. That's my first point. The second point is currently sales over the internet are exploding, literally. So I would like, increasing rapidly in other words, I would like to know whether you are considering, despite the fact that part of your business already takes place over the internet, are you considering on ramping up this business done on the internet? Is it a relay for growth for you? Thank you. Let me attempt to answer both questions. Concerning enhancing the loyalty of people via the dividends, let me just stress, and I know this is going to disappoint a certain number of you, and I do apologize for this ahead of time. Let me just stress that we do not consider that, globally speaking, the dividends, enhanced dividends, are a good solution, or increased dividends, because it's a solution that is limited, and also it is a solution that is not necessarily one that is well accepted by a certain number of shareholders who, it's true, more often than not might be institutional shareholders rather than being individual shareholders. However, we do agree, we share your analysis as to the fact that yes, it is important to have loyal shareholders, and it's important to attempt to give to these shareholders rights that are to a certain extent greater than those of the other types of shareholders. One of the ways of doing so is to give you double voting rights. This is something that we do implement, and despite the request that a certain number of people are making to us, we have no intention whatsoever to get rid of this. Claude Bébéard in the past, for example, has referred to this subject specifically. It's true that today we have people who are quick wins, quick in, quick out in terms of their investments. And it would be absolutely absurd to imagine that in a certain number of cases, acquiring the right to vote is something that should take a certain amount of time. Legally speaking, it's not possible. We do have the possibility of giving you the twofold voting rights. And so I would argue that this is the measure that we believe to be the measure that we can adopt. And so at this stage, we do not have the desire, near the wherewithal to move one stage beyond this. Next, concerning the internet, Denis, did you want to answer? Yes, it's true. We too have observed that sales over the internet are increasing rapidly. As you know, we do have business activities, direct insurance sales that take place for the majority in housing insurance and car insurance, not only in France, but in roughly 10 countries around Europe, also in Japan and in Korea. Also in France, we've launched what we call direct épargne, direct savings, and we have AXA Bank that is present on the internet for direct or banking in insurance business. Of course, with this type of sales, the internet is taking over from telephone sales, and we do have some very good distribution channels in this sector. We believe that the internet is a major channel. It's very important in terms of our distribution network, and we would like the internet to become not only a tool or a system that the client uses in order to contact us and in order to buy insurance directly over the web, but we want it also to be a system, a device that enables our distributors to be more effective in terms of the answers, the solutions that they propose to our clients. Thank you. Let's accept a question from you, madam. Sir? Good afternoon. First and foremost, you didn't provide a specific answer to this gentleman who, to a certain extent, was asking for preferential rates when he wanted to take out an insurance policy as an AXA shareholder. You provided an answer, but you were not on spot on the subject. You weren't as specific as you needed to be. Next, this lady has just spoken, and she has stated that she would like to have an improved or enhanced dividend as a loyal shareholder. Here, once again, your answer was not sufficient. Even if you triple the voting rights, when we see that individual shareholders, when they have, what difference does it make? So either you want to be like Air Liquide, the company, and you want to have a solid foundation of individual, faithful, long-standing shareholders, or you don't want these people. It's up to you to decide. Next point, I told you before you came here, and I would like to say I appreciated the fact that you came here half an hour before to talk with those of us who are here. I've rarely seen this in a shareholders meeting. It's very important, this fact, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Next, I would like you to have talked about Greece, and you did talk about Greece, and you said you'd talk about Greece if I asked the question. And I'm amazed that you said this, because I think it really is a very important issue at the current time for an insurance company. We're being told that it's the banks and the insurance companies that are in the front row. As far as the banks, the Société Générale, we all know full well Mr. Daniel Bouton is in a good position to talk about this. Next, let's talk about Greece. As I said, maybe Greece will lead on to other things, but I hope not. Let's hope that things will improve. But if we all remember rightly that after the major crisis in 1929 that lasted for a certain number of years, it didn't just take place in 1929. After that, there was massive inflation, and the debts that had been accumulated had to be paid back, whereas the currency was not worth very much. Then after the war, there were some very fruitful, very profitable years, but then there was a massive amount of debt, high interest rates, and our governments have now realised that it's going to be very hard to find a solution. So now inflation is starting to rise, and look at what it was like in Mitterrand's time, 14% with interest rates at 18.5% in certain cases. My question is, what's going to happen to us now after this crisis? Maybe not immediately today, but maybe the day after tomorrow, in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, inflation will be enormous. So I would simply like you to say what you think, please, not from one day to the next, not about tomorrow, but what about in the future? Because governing is all about forecasting what is going to be necessary. We often criticise our politicians. We say they don't forecast what's going to happen in the future. All they're interested in is the current day. So can you give us your forecast? And one last point, if you don't mind. Earlier on, when I listened to you, I wanted to say bon appétit. Enjoy your meal, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, do you remember? It's a reference to something that went on in Spain. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have too many shares, and if you can't subscribe to new shares, and if people are still proposing thousands of shares to you, let me just say that when I buy 1,000 shares, it's a massive amount of money. It was amazing to see that. When we see people such as those at Alcatel who say that they're going to hand in their notice, Mr. Serge Turic, for example, and his CEO who say they're going to hand in their notice at the end of the year and who ask you to vote for their golden parachutes and all this stuff, it's very upsetting and it's immoral, totally immoral. I would even go as far as to say that it's a form of provocation. I really cannot accept that when there are redundancy schemes where people don't know what they're going to eat tomorrow, you have this type of situation. You should set the standard. You should show the example. Mr. Pebreau is one of your board members. He's one of your directors. So I think he should be here. The BNP general meeting that took place last year, I believe that he stated that several thousand shares had been offered to him. And these shares were free shares that were being offered to him. But despite this, nowadays we say that these are free shares that are given to you as a reward for performance. But they are free shares. At the end of the day, they are free shares. So let me just stress it. A certain number of shares were offered to him. And what's interesting is that the directors who made this proposal to him, because those are the people who are responsible. It's the directors who are responsible. So let me just stress that I will no longer vote in favour of somebody who is re-elected when I see all of these dilutions, because our role, our capacity is being diluted, because you've got these pages and these pages of resolutions that are not to our benefit in any way. But let me just refer back to what I was saying. These free shares were proposed to the gentleman I quoted, and then Mrs. Florence Parisot, who, as you know, is in charge of the bosses organisation in France, well, she was on the committee, and she was the person who made this proposal. Well, Mr. Pebreau, let me stress, refused all of these shares, and he said that he refused them. So if you don't mind, please. There are other people, other shareholders who would like to ask their questions, if you don't mind. Yes, I've finished. I'll stop there. I think what I've said is sufficient. I think I've been as wordy as I need to be, and I hope that I've been understood.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, sir. Now, I'm not going to refer back to the free shares part. We did talk together about this before the meeting, so you know what our answer is to this issue. Next, as far as Greece is concerned, well, if you really do want me to answer, I will answer. Mr. Chateauvieux earlier on gave you an explanation, a very detailed explanation as to the structure, the remuneration structure within the group. The shares that are distributed are performance shares, and I stress they are not systematically shares that are acquired. It's true that once these shares are acquired, they are not paid as such, but they replace a form of remuneration which would have been money that would have been paid in cash more quickly than the shares are paid out. So it is a way of delaying and making random part of the compensation of the member of staff, which in a lot of cases brings about a reduced risk for the shareholders. Yes, the shareholders' role is diluted. Nevertheless, it does mean that cash spending is not being made, because if this remuneration was paid out to the member of staff at the end of the year in cash format, then it would cost more than giving free shares. Next, on the subject of Greece, let's look at that, and also sovereign debt globally speaking. As far as Greece is concerned, I've said that our exposure as the group stands is very limited. 600 million euros of exposure in relation to Greece on the 31st of December. This exposure amounts to 500 million today, for a total bond portfolio of 400 billion euros. So I do not believe that we can say that AXA is overexposed to Greece. That's the first comment that I would like to make. The second comment is as follows. What is going to happen in terms of the sovereign debt, globally speaking, across the board over the next few years? Well, as I said earlier when I answered the previous question, our impression is that first and foremost, we're in a situation whereby liquidity is quite abundant, because the central bank, in order to delete part of the impact of the crisis, has made liquidity, has made cash available on the market, and gradually this cash will have to be drawn back in. And as growth will come about, as growth will gradually increase, the long-term interest rates will no doubt increase. The second point that we think is relatively likely is that there will be a clearer distinction between the good and the bad pupils. The good pupils are those, for example, who have public spending in relation to the GDP that is reasonable. In other words, these will be countries that have public finances that are stable and healthy. And when we look at strategies that are applied for exiting the crisis, it's these countries that will be able to reduce their spending rather than increasing their taxes. That's where the debate will be extremely interesting. Next, so if I refer to inflation, yes, possibly there will be a bit of inflation, but things have changed since before the war. We in Europe have a central bank, for example, that hates inflation, and I think it's a very good thing for people who save money, globally speaking, because obviously inflation, generally speaking, as our grandmother says, is what puts people who've saved money into a very difficult position. Exiting the crisis will guarantee this by investing in innovation, by reducing our spending. This is why it's important to reduce our operating spending. This is what we're trying to do in AXA, and this is what we hope the governments in the different countries will do also. So there is my answer, sir. Thank you very much. Okay, the person next to board number 5, if you would like to ask a question. Hello, Chairman. Olivier de Gers, SICAF Société Investors. I have a certain number of regrets concerning the change in the governance approach with AXA. You've proposed to combine a certain number of functions. A vice chairman position is going to be created, whereas under French law, this person doesn't have the same responsibilities as a non-executive chairman. And the separation of the powers and responsibilities is important in a company such as AXA's because it enables you to separate the control functions. Why do I have regrets? Well, no doubt because a certain number of institutional investors voted against this, not against AXA's management, but simply because we as investors preferred the idea of separating the powers and responsibilities. Next, concerning the memorandum and articles of association, why have you got rid of the minimum of 100 shares per director under the new articles of association? We might have imagined, for example, that you would have increased this minimum simply because in order to be a director on a board in AXA, no doubt you have to be a shareholder. Thank you. If you don't mind, I'm going to answer these two questions. Now, the first answer is that what has been decided and what for us corresponds to the normal format is the fact that, yes, we have a CEO and a chairman who are not one and the same person. And it's given the specific circumstances and given the qualities that Henri de Castres has as a person, and given what we believe in today's circumstances, the interests of the AXA Group, is for this reason that today, at the current time, we've recommended that this position be fulfilled as chairman and CEO by Mr. Henri de Castres. But we did have a massive discussion in our supervisory board on this, and following on from this discussion, we recognised that it is normal to separate these two functions, and that when the circumstances do not justify this, when there is no separation of the functions, from a statutory point of view, in a very precise manner and with lots of detail, we wanted to organise a good balance of the power within the scope of the management board. I've spent a lot of time having telephone conversations with all of the different investors, particularly the institutional investors, very often outside of France, who of course ask these questions that you've just asked. And we're under the impression that the answers that have been provided by AXA today are answers whereby we say, in principle, we recognise that yes, it is virtuous to separate these two functions. Nevertheless, we make the recommendation that Henri de Castres today be both chairman and CEO, and above and beyond what is done in lots of other companies, we've also institutionalized in the articles of association the roles and the powers that are quite considerable, roles and powers of the vice chairman or of the CEO. Also, it's important to note that in the internal rules of the supervisory board, a request is made to each of the directors to own a minimum number of shares that corresponds to the amount of fees that they receive for a year. And this amounts to more than the 300 shares that we often include in the memorandum and articles of association. For example, when the share dropped considerably prior to the general meeting of last year, a certain number of shares had to be bought back in order to comply with this rule. Let's accept a question from the person next to card number 7 and then card number 8. Good afternoon, Jean-Pierre Ardisson. I'm an individual shareholder. I used to be a member of staff for AXA. I have insurance policies with AXA and I retired from the company. I'd like to ask you questions concerning your sales policy concerning life insurance. Now, we've seen that the revenue has dropped by 4% in life insurance in 2008 and also in 2009. Now, it is possible that the yield of your Euro fund, Plan Suro, is partly responsible for this because for a certain number of years, the profitability ratio of this system has been less competitive. In 2009, for example, it was lower than the market average. Now, there's also something that is particularly shocking. Let me stress, you privilege your new clients, your new policyholders, your new contracts in relation to those who have been with you, who've had a portfolio with you for a long time. It's shocking for a certain number of reasons. First and foremost, it is shocking because it's the people who've been with you for a long time that have enabled you to buy these long-standing bonds that have higher payback rates than the current bonds that are issued. And it is these people that have enabled you to build the company. Secondly, these contracts that I'm referring to are generally based upon the same assets, the general assets of the company. Thirdly, their management fees are pretty much identical, and even the older contracts benefit from slightly lower management fees, which normally should result in slightly better performance for the fund, because we have the gross rate minus the management fees that gives us the net annual yield of the fund. So I repeat, I really do have the question, from a commercial perspective, if we look at AXA's policy that has been criticised, or not, it's not specific to AXA, but all of the insurance companies that proceed in this way are criticised by the powers that be. In other words, the fact that everybody tends to, in the insurance world, to favour new clients. So I would like to know whether it really is in AXA's interest to implement this policy. Are you right? Should you not consider that your clients who go back a long way necessarily have accumulated a certain amount of money, a certain amount of capital? So one day or another, AXA or even other insurance companies should implement the measures that are required to make arrangements to look after these people. For example, at the current time, we cannot transfer our companies from our contracts from one company to another. There are other things in France, the PEAs, PEA, that can be transferred from one company to another. But I would simply like to know, what is AXA's position in relation to this? And one very last point. I know that in 2010, you have planned to grant a boni for the Plan Suro plan for the policyholders who, above and beyond having a certain amount of capital on their contract, for those people who will invest an additional percentage in the fund, in the unit-linked accounts, in other words, in what we call the SICAV in France. I would like to know, is 2010, this very dangerous year, as we've been saying, after everything that we've gone into detail on, is the moment timely? Look at what the bond market is like. Look at public debt. My question is this the best moment to encourage your clients to leave a secure world and to start investing in these areas? Thank you.
Yes,
well, first and foremost, the declaration you made is a very general declaration. So I'm going to try and respond to this by giving you very precise answers. First and foremost, I'd like to talk about benefiting from the profits in the company. And I'd just like to say that the distribution of the beneficiary part in euros is organised by the contract, but also by the code for insurance that regulates what we do. And AXA has always complied in its distribution policy related to the profits with the insurance code. Another point that is even more important, I think we should stress this, when we look at the Planis Fund, AXA's Planis Fund, we've always achieved levels of performance that either are in line with the average for the market or over recent years, apart from over the previous years, tend to be higher than the market average. So let me stress that our clients do remain loyal to us, and our clients are not suffering in relation to other clients who have contracts with other French companies. If we work out the average for the last 10 years of the payout from this fund, we're able to observe that we are above the market average. The third point I would like to raise, and Jean-Pierre Ardisson said this as well, in 2010, yes, we have decided to alter slightly our distribution policy for in relation to our profits, simply in order to reward, in brackets, if we use this type of language, in order to reward those clients of ours who are clients who've been with us for a long time, and also if they're clients who have quite visible investments or who've invested quite a lot of money. Obviously, the aim is to ensure that in 2010, these clients should be able to benefit from an additional bonus. And the last point I would like to stress is that AXA France's revenue in the life insurance sector in 2009 did not drop. It increased. It increased, and I stress. Now, Jean-Pierre Ardisson, if you would like us to continue with this debate that has been ongoing for a certain number of years, if you'd like us to continue after the meeting, then I'd be more than happy to do so. If you don't mind, I'd just like to add two pieces of information in relation to François Pierson's answer. We've talked about the pooling of the policyholders. When you see the rates drop, it's true that this can be seen as a period of time that can be unfavourable to those people who've been with us for a long time. But when the rates rise, people are very happy to benefit from this pooling situation, because otherwise the rates that would be paid out would be much lower. Next, another point, second point, concerning customers, why should customers invest in unit-linked accounts rather than in euros? Unfortunately, we've observed that our clients didn't necessarily invest where it was most interesting for them. For example, when the financial markets were very low, it would have been very advantageous for our clients to invest in unit-linked accounts, and they didn't do so. They invested in euro-based funds, and so they didn't benefit very much from the market's turnaround situation. We think that it's a very good idea at the current time to invest in the unit-linked accounts. Okay, the person who is next to panel number 8, and then after that we'll accept one more question. Yes, Chairman, you mentioned earlier on direct épargne. I believe that in the room, and it's the case for me personally, I think there are a certain number of people in the room who are not familiar with direct or direct épargne. Could you explain what it is? Then my second question is, at Direct Épargne, is there a toll-free number that we could call in order to obtain further information? Thank you. Direct Épargne or Direct Épargne, Denis Duverne mentioned it when he was referring to a question in relation to the business activities that we have on the internet. And it is true that the answer was yes, on the internet we have P&C and savings offerings, and in the savings offering sector we have a possibility that we offer to clients to make savings directly over the internet or over the phone. This is a company that was launched, let me think, in 2008, and we have already we already have quite a lot of money that has been invested by quite a few clients. So it's a business activity that is gradually being ramped up, that is doing reasonably well. The toll-free number, I'm afraid, I don't know it off by heart, but I'll look for the toll-free number while the session is ongoing. But it is available on the internet, definitely. Well, let's accept a question near to number 1, and then we'll have a question near to number 2, and then afterwards we'll move on for the votes of the resolutions, if you don't mind. Hello, I'm an individual shareholder. I have 2 questions I'd like to ask about 2 specific sectors that are very low level in your group. It's the banking sector and private equity that we've already talked about. In terms of the banking sector, it would seem that you're stepping backwards to a certain extent. In other words, we can't see any meaningful actions coming from you, and we haven't seen any for recent years. However, in the private equity sector, we can see that actions have been taken that you've mentioned. And here, however, they seem to be contrary to what the bankers are doing. In other words, the bankers are withdrawing from the private equity sector because it weighs heavily in their ratios, in the balance of their ratios. Does Solvency II, and this is a question, does it give you a lot more room for manoeuvre in this sector in relation to private equity? And next, in your reference document, you don't make any mention at all of the carried interest that there could be for managers, for example, in the private equity companies. And there could be quite a lot of money involved if this was the case. So I'm going to answer concerning the banking side of your question. Now, the bank, first and foremost, let me stress that we don't want to get involved in any type of bank. The type of bank that we set up, that we work with, is a form of prolongation of our savings business. And our savings activity has, of course, been affected by the global situation over the last 2 years. And we have observed simply that over the last 2 years, our clients have been very, very interested in liquid investments, short-term investments, even if they're not necessarily the most profitable investments in terms of the interest rates. You've said that we haven't been very active over recent years in the banking sector, and I would like to prove otherwise from this point of view. Let me just stress that AXA Bank is part of the life and savings business activity in a certain number of countries. It's the case in France. It's also the case in Belgium. We started up a banking activity also in Switzerland. We have also entered into business in the Czech Republic and in Slovakia in this area. And so we do have a business plan, a plan that aims to cover all of the countries where we believe that this additional line of products is one that we need to offer to our clients in order to guarantee the consistency of our product and service offering on a long-term and medium-term basis, whether it's for financial reasons or for clients who need financing that is like to P&C insurance for financing home loans, for example, or purchasing of cars. Let me just say that this business sector has expanded in a moderate manner over recent years, but it is a growing part of our business. It is not a part of our business that is gradually dropping off. I'd also like to answer just a few more words on the bank. In France, our banking activity is continuing to progress. We have 600,000 clients, whereas we had 100,000 in 2003 when we purchased Banque Direct. As far as private equity is concerned, now what you see with the banks, for example, is that the banks gradually are exiting this type of business activity. It's true because it's used up a lot of their money, a lot of their equity capital in the past, whereas this type of business in AXA is business that we do for 1/3 for our policyholders and for 2/3 with investors, with external investors. Within the scope of Solvability 2, working with private equity is not necessarily something that is recommended because the cost in terms of the equity is going to be quite high. We believe that we'll be able to continue to have 1.5% of our insurance money invested in private equity, and that will enable AXA Private Equity to continue to develop its business. However, when you talk about the carried interest of the managers in private equity companies, it's true that this carried interest is not mentioned in the reference document because the management of the AXA Group are not managers of private equity companies, so they don't have any comments to make, or there's no reason why they should be mentioned in the reference documents. Okay, the person who is next to panel number 2, and then we'll move on if you don't mind. Yes, I'm an individual shareholder also, and I have 2 questions I'd like to put to you. The first question is I'd like to have a summary of the shareholder base at the current time for the company. Secondly, why do you have a distribution rate in terms of the dividends that is relatively low and limited because you distribute a dividend of roughly 33%? Lastly, as an answer to Mr. Duverne, I am naturally surprised by the answers that you gave, sir, in terms of life insurance. I personally also work in this sector, and we all know full well that insurance companies prefer to develop contracts with freedom to operate on the market. And we know full well that, okay, some people do limit the scope of what they do, but in that case, you need to take into account the client's interests. What you're looking for is captive clients with rates whereby you pay out, whereby you give them what you want to pay out, full stop. We're going to answer, sir. First of all, concerning the structure, the organisation of the shareholdership, Denis Duverne did mention it. I don't know whether, technically speaking, we can put this slide back on the screen. It was slide number 29. I don't know whether it's possible to display this on the screen, but the individual shareholders account for 7.5%, 5.9% for salaried shareholders. AXA Mutual just over 14. Then afterwards, you have BNP Paribas at 5.3. And then if we look at the other shareholders, and if we look at the spread, or the geographic spread, French institutionals account for 18, North America 20, the UK and Ireland 12. Those from Germany and the Benelux countries, 5 in total, and the other European countries account for 4, and the rest of the world 3.2. So there you are. The structure has just been displayed on the screen. Now, concerning the distribution rate, we are not distributing 33%, but 40%. Last year, let me remind you that the figure was lower, given the circumstances that we were up against. But this year, we're distributing 40% of the current income. We want to distribute, our aim is to always distribute between 40 to 50% of the current income. Why do we not distribute more? Because we wish to use part of our income to invest and to finance growth. Here I'm talking about internal growth, because every time we have new business, we have to improve our solvability margins. Every time we develop new business, this is vital. And when we want to finance acquisitions, well, of course, you need to come up with the cash. When we make acquisitions, the acquisitions we make are medium-sized acquisitions. Next, concerning the limited scope sometimes of our contracts, let me just stress that we do focus a great deal on these issues. The perimeter or the scope of the pooling system is vital for us. We believe that we manage things in our shareholders' interest. But let me move on one stage further from what François said. One thing we do not do, but that a lot of our competitors do, is to accept in the general funds new clients who are virtually institutional clients, who use the general funds in order to find remuneration or compensation that is higher than what they could get from the monetary funds, the CCAV. We don't do this because we consider that these clients are not long-term clients for the insurance companies. We consider that these are clients who are there and that it is harmful to our individual clients. We have some of our competitors who achieve growth in this way through these means. We would rather have lower growth than them. It's not the approach that we adopt. Our aim is to defend the rights of the individual policyholders who trust us in the long term. Okay, thank you. I'd now like to say to the woman who asked the question that the toll number of Direct Épargne is 0800 970 113, so that we've given you a full answer to your question. So if you don't mind, ladies and gentlemen, we'll accept the last question from the gentleman and then...
Thank you. Name is Philip Salons. Allow me, I'm going to sit down. I had a car accident and I am still, weak. I've got a cranial trauma. I've got 2 questions. First is as follows. I apologize for the problems I have in speaking out. Now, whereas our company, let me wear my glasses to ask my question and read it out to you. Whereas our company is not, as indebted as other companies. It's not more indebted. Its revenues and profits are not, as the others. Why don't we get the nice rating from the rating agencies? That's my first question. Do we lack publicity or advertising? Second question, which is quite specific. Although I wouldn't ask it to you, but first I met Mr. Decast, Mr. de Pierson. A few years back, even I met with what's his name? I forgot his name anyway. Okay, due to my accident. I met you and I talked to you, and I'd like to tell you. That such people are, humanistic and humane. Let me tell it to you. Now, my accident gave rise to problems, but I went back to work a few weeks ago, but once in the next week, I guess I will, really put it into my life, and I'd like to know why you would let me do so. The question you're asking, of course, sir, well, is a traditional question, and a question which is, I would say, very specific. I don't know what your situation is, but obviously, we will, of course, look at your specific situation, of course, when the assembly is over. First part of the question, which is that of rating agencies, we're not really probably considered by the rating agencies. Denis Deverne will answer more precisely. We have the most ratings among all insurance companies. Yes, 2 or 3 AA plus or minus. We're among the companies having one of the most solid ratings. No company has ever rated 3 AAs. 2A companies are very few and far between. So 2 AA minus, we're among the most solid companies. And it doesn't prevent us from doing business. A lot of individuals and companies do trust in the health of AXA. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your question. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you that now the term of the executive board is now expiring. Claude Brunet, until he left at the end of 2009, devoted a lot of work to the company on behalf of the board, on behalf of all our clients and customers. We're proud of what they have accomplished so far. Their commitment to the company, their determination to make AXA be a great company. Let me tell it to Freddie Bookert today, who will retire from the company at the end of assembly. He devoted all his skill and expertise at the service of AXA's greatness. AXA's greatness is not due to the figures presented to you. It is due to the fact that we are doing a great business. Our business is at the service of men and women to whom we provide the guarantees to fight off and to face risks based on total commitment. I can tell you, in my own company, the score they're getting is above and beyond what we get in ordinary or run-of-the-mill companies. Let me praise them for taking into account the clients' their expectations for measuring their degree of satisfaction. For 1% of indifference in the achievements of goals, all the employees everywhere in the world, did not get 50 bonus shares. Let us give them a round of applause before we move on to the resolutions and their approval. Let's move on to the vote of resolutions. We achieved reached the quorum. We have 10,861 shareholders. 54. 54. Wrong sheet of paper. 54. Anyway, we're above the quorum necessary to vote on the resolution in a nutshell. Right now. Okay, here's the right sheet of paper. 11,000. 11,961 stockholders present. 54.40% of the shares and 61.11% of the voting rights. We have 38 resolutions to vote upon. Let me call upon Denis Deverne to tell you how the vote works and to move on to the vote on resolutions. You have a electronic keypad, and you must deliver one vote on every resolution. If you do not press any key, you will be deemed to be abstaining. Maître Miellet, the court order is controlling the vote. You got to give back the keypads to the hostesses at the end of the General Assembly. Thank you for, switching off your cell phones. Now we'll move on to the vote of resolutions on the agenda of the Assembly. 11 first resolutions are to be handled by the ordinary assembly. First resolution will approve the corporate accounts. Vote is open. We're voting on the approval of accounts for fiscal 2009. Please vote.
Le scrutin est clos.
This is closed. Resolution is adopted. Second resolution will approve the consolidated accounts for fiscal 09. Vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos.
Okay. The resolution is, votes are being processed. Resolution is adopted. The resolution will approve the allocation of earnings and the payout of a dividend of 55 cents per share with a payout on May 3rd, 2010. The vote is open. Vote is done. Now, resolution adopted. Third resolution would like to approve the special report of the auditors on the regulated agreements. The vote is open. Special report by statutory auditors on regulated agreements. Vote is over. Resolution is adopted. Fourth resolution aims at approving the regulated commitments in terms of retirement, social protection, and customer service. For myself, members of the executive board will not take part in the vote according to the legal provisions. The vote is open. Okay, vote is over, and the fifth resolution is adopted. This resolution aims at approving the commitments for Henri de Castres in line with the AFEP-MEDEF recommendations. Henri de Castres will not take part in the voting process. The vote is open. Okay, vote is over. Resolution is adopted. Seventh resolution aims at the approval of commitments for Denis de Verne in line with the AFEP-MEDEF recommendation. I will not take part in the vote for this resolution, but the vote is open. Vote is over. Resolution is adopted. Eighth resolution aims at renewal of the term of office as a board member of Mr. Norbert D'Entrosong for a 4-year term. His CV has been appearing on the screen. This resolution will be null and void in the event that the 15th resolution is adopted, which deals with the change in the mode of governance of the company. The vote is open. Vote is over, and the resolution is adopted. Ninth resolution aims at renewing the term of office of the Mazar auditing firm for 6 fiscal years as a statutory auditing firm. Vote is open. Vote is over. The 10th resolution aims at appointing Mr. Jean-Pierre Briest-Turkheim as a statutory auditor for 6 fiscal years. The vote is open. Vote is over. And the resolution is adopted. This resolution aims at authorizing the company to buy back its own shares to the tune of 10% of the capital for a maximum unit price of 35 euros for 18 months. The vote is open. Vote is over. Resolution is adopted. The 5 current resolutions must be handled by the Extraordinary General Assembly. The 12th resolution aims at authorizing the board to increase the share capital by issuing ordinary shares or giving access to ordinary shares for the members of a company savings plan to the tune of 150 million euros max for a duration of 18 months maximum. The vote is open. Vote is over. The resolution is adopted. The 13th resolution aims at authorizing the executive board to increase the share capital by issuing ordinary shares with preferential rights in favor of a category of beneficiaries up to 150 million euros maximum for 18 months. The vote is open. The vote is over. Resolution is adopted. 14th resolution aims at authorizing the company to reduce the share capital by canceling ordinary shares up to 10% of the share capital for 18 months. The vote is open. Vote is over. Resolution is adopted. 15th resolution aims at changing the mode of administration of the company. The change in bylaws, in effect, that approvals given by the executive board will continue and be given to the executive board. The vote is open. The vote is over. The resolution is adopted. This resolution aims at approving other statutory changes not related to the change in the mode of governance. The vote is open. Vote is over, and the resolution is adopted.
Nous revenons maintenant.
So we're now going to refer back to the General Ordinary Meeting, and the 17th resolution aims at the appointment of Mr. Henri de Castres as a director for 4 years. His CV is now on the screen. So voting is open. The voting is closed. The resolution is adopted. The 18th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Denis Duverne as a director for a period of 4 years. His CV is also on the screen. You may now vote. Voting is closed. The resolution is adopted. Thank you. The 19th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Jacques de Chateauvieux as a director for a period of 3 years. This is the duration that remains of his term of office as a member of the Supervisory Board. His CV is on the screen and also on the page 515 of the annual report for 2009. So you may now vote. So the voting is closed. And the resolution is adopted. The 20th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Norbert d'Entresangle as a director for 4 years. His CV is now on the screen and also on page 516 of the annual report for 2009. So you may now vote. Voting is closed. And the resolution is adopted. The 21st resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Jean-Martin Folz as a director for 1 year. This is the duration that remains of his term of office as a member of the Supervisory Board. His CV is on the screen and also on page 517 of the annual report for 2009. So you may now vote. Voting is closed. And the resolution is adopted. The 22nd resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Anthony Hamilton as director for a period of 3 years. This is the period that remains for his term of office as a member of the Supervisory Board. You have his CV on the screen and also on page 518 of the annual report for 2009. You may now vote. Voting is over. And the resolution is adopted. The 23rd resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. François Martineau as a director for a period of 2 years, the duration that remains of his term of office as a member of the Supervisory Board. You have his CV on the screen and also on page 519 of the annual report for 2009. So you may now vote. Voting is over. And the resolution is adopted. The 24th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Giuseppe Mussari as a director for a period of 1 year, the duration that remains of his term of office as a member of the Supervisory Board. His CV is on the screen and also on page 520 of the annual report for 2009. You may now vote. Voting is over. And the resolution is adopted. The 25th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Ramon de Oliveira as a director for a period of 3 years, the duration that remains of his term of office as a member of the board of the Supervisory Board. His CV is on the screen and also on page 521 of the annual report for 2009. So you may now vote. Voting is over. The resolution is adopted. The 26th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Michel Pebreau as a director for a period of 3 years, the duration that remains for his term of office as a member of the Supervisory Board. His CV is on the screen and also on page 522 of the annual report. So you may now vote. Voting is over. And And the resolution is adopted. The 27th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mrs. Dominique Renich as a director for a period of 3 years, the duration that remained for her term of office as member of the Supervisory Board. Her CV is on the screen and also on page 523 of the annual report for 2009. You may now vote. So voting is over. The resolution is adopted. The 28th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Ezra Suleiman as a director for a period of 1 year. This is the time period that remained for his term of office as a member of the Supervisory Board. His CV is on the screen and also on page 524 of the annual report for 2009. Voting is over. The resolution is adopted. The 29th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mrs. Isabelle Cocher as a director for a period of 4 years. Her CV is on the screen and also on page 525 of the annual report for 2009. You may now vote. Voting is over. And the resolution is adopted. The 30th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mrs. Suet Firm Lee as director for a period of 4 years. Her CV is on the screen and also on page 526 of the annual report for 2009. So you may now vote. Voting is over. The resolution is adopted. The voting of the resolutions numbers 31 to 36 forms the subject of appointing the representative of the salaried shareholders on the board of directors of AXA. We would like to ask you to make your choice between the 6 applicants whose list is on the screen. Mrs. Wendy Cooper is the candidate or the applicant recommended by the Executive Board and the Supervisory Board. In order to guarantee equality or equal representation between the candidates, the result of the vote will only be revealed once the 6 resolutions will have been put to the vote. There will be a technical deadline of roughly 30 seconds that will be necessary between the vote for each resolution in order to enable us to record and prepare the results. So the 31st resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mrs. Wendy Cooper as a director on the proposal for the salaried shareholders for a period of 2 years, which is the amount of time, the term of office that remains of her term of office on the board of directors, on the supervisory board. Her CV is on the screen and also on page 527 of the annual report for 2009. You may now vote. Voting is over. The 32nd resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. John Coultrap as director on proposal from the salaried shareholders for 4 years. His CV is on the screen. This resolution is not approved or recommended by the Executive Board. Voting is over. The 33rd resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Paul Gersbach as a director following the proposal made by the salaried shareholders for a period of 4 years. His CV is on the screen and also on page 529 of the annual report for 09. This resolution is not approved by the Executive Board. You may now vote. Voting is over. The 34th resolution forms the subject of the appointment of Mr. Sébastien Herzog as director following the proposal made by the salaried shareholders for a period of 4 years. His CV is on the screen and also on page 530 of the annual report for 09. This resolution is not approved by the Executive Board. Voting is over. The 35th resolution aims at the appointment of Mr. Rodney Koch as a director based on the proposal put forward by the salaried shareholders for a period of 4 years. His CV is on the screen and also on page 531 of the annual report for 09. This resolution is not approved by the Executive Board. You may now vote. Voting is over. The 36th resolution concerns the appointment of Mr. Jason Steinberg as a director based on the proposal put forward by the salaried shareholders for a period of 4 years. His CV is on the screen and also on page 532 of the annual report for 2009. This resolution is not approved by the Executive Board. You may now vote. Voting is over. So it is Mrs. Wendy Cooper who is appointed as member of the Board of Directors. The 37th resolution is aimed at fixing the annual amount for the attendance fees that are allocated to the Board of Directors, and this figure is set at €1.2 million. You may now vote. Voting is over. And the resolution is adopted. The 38th resolution concerns the proxies that are required in order to be able to implement the formalities linked to this assembly. Voting is open. So voting is over. The resolution is adopted. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, gentlemen. I would like to remind you, please, that when you leave the room, could you please make sure that you take your voting pads with you and accept the gift that will be given to you. Next year, the general meeting will take place on the 27th of April 2011 at the Palais des Congrès at 2:30. Since nothing else is left on the agenda, I would like to say that our session is now over.